Where are the elders, the wise women, the crones, the guardians of truth, here to gently, lovingly, and playfully guide us toward the fulfillment of our collective destiny? It turns out that they're right here in our midst. And my next guest, Stephanie Raffelock, is showcasing the reclamation of aging as a moment of becoming, no longer a dreaded withering into insignificance. She wrote a delightful little book on aging uh, uh, that lays down a new and beautiful track for the journey into our richest, deepest, and wildest years. That's a review of my next guest, Stephanie Raffelock's book called A Delightful Little Book on Aging. She's also the host of the Coffee Table Wisdom podcast, and just a delightful soul. Stephanie, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me. I was looking forward to this today.
I wanted to read that review because I just thought whoever the person who wrote that,
Dr.
uh,
Kelly Brogan wrote that.
yes, and I've been seeing her all over the place now, talking, in this realm, just captures for me what you bring to the world and doing research on you. And we were just talking beforehand, because I have the Mastering Midlife podcast, and you're focused on helping people age gracefully, right? And I'm a decade behind you and working in that, and it's like this happens at every age. And then before we started talking, you said, it's funny because we're right now in the middle of the coronavirus, whether you're listening to this in 2022 or you're listening to this in April of 2020. We're in the middle of this crisis. And you said, this kind of brings out the crisis that we in the aging demographic deal with every day. Let's use that as our jumping off point.
That's a great jumping off point. Older aging takes place against a backdrop of grief. There's the loss of athletic prowess, family, friends, work identity. All of those things happen. We have a great sense of urgent vulnerability. And in order to age well, we have to adapt in order to navigate those waters. Otherwise, we get stuck in an attitude like, oh, doesn't it really just suck to grow older? That's not the attitude with which I want to grow older. So when I look at what's going on in the culture right now with the coronavirus, and I think it's safe to say, whether you're listening to this program kind of within these times or you're listening to it a year from now, no one is going to soon forget what these times are like. I look at people navigating the coronavirus and I go, this is happening against a backdrop of grief. I've listened to my friends for the last couple of weeks, check in. How are you doing? Oh, fine. We're good. We're fine. And it's like kind of that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the beginning of grief is denial. So we're all walking around going, I'm fine. I'm fine. But the truth is, grief demands of us that we pay her homage, not so that we can get stuck there, but so that we can begin to build a bridge from grief to what the next step is. So people that are growing older deal with this all the time because we're vulnerable. We have to adapt. We have to keep our attitudes strong so that we're aging with nobility and not defeat and decay. This is meant to be a noble passage. So too, the coronavirus. This is meant to be a wake-up call. This is meant to be a noble passage that doesn't take away...
For everyone.
For everyone. It doesn't mean that it takes away from the suffering of it, but it is a time to confront the grief in our life and then begin to ask the questions that one must ask at every single decade of life. Who am I? Who do I want to become? How do I reinvent myself? Reinvention being the stepping stones to awakening, and awakening not being a destination, but a continuous process. Those are the questions we need to be asking. A lot of my neighbors are home right now. And, you can go a little stir crazy, not going out of the house very much. I walk every day with my husband and my dog. But the question comes up, do I take enough care of my health? Am I one of those people that joins the gym in January and then I never use the membership? What can I do for myself to exercise in my home today? Because we know that exercise improves immunity. It
Mm,
strengthens immunity. It also kind of gets rid of the crazies. If you're carrying around some extra anxiety right now or fear, it just helps to move, get those endorphins running. Um, the same is true of your mind. What can you do right now to stimulate your mind and not go crazy bored? What can you read? What kind of online stuff can you take? I can't believe the number of people out of the goodness of their hearts that are offering online courses right now for free.
mm.
This would be a great time. I'm taking up crocheting, by the way. I found it at some library in like Oregon. The local library teaches crocheting online. So I'm learning that. And then in the sense of spirit, what have we been pushing aside or leaving aside thinking, it'll take care of itself? Do we spend time during the day deep breathing? Do we spend time during the day saying thank you? Do we spend a little bit of quiet contemplative time? And might we come out of this time with a greater sense of how to keep moving, how to stimulate our intellect and our interests, and how to spend quiet time with ourselves without going nuts? There you have
I
it.
I think a lot of people are learning to find for learning to learn to spend time by themselves, right? I think that's a new
Yeah.
thing. If we can turn off the news, right? If they can
Yeah.
if we can stop watching social media and stop watching the news and stop
Yeah.
watching Twitter and all that stuff, and slow down enough, I think that is a new thing for a lot of people. I want to go back to something you said earlier, which was you used the phrase urgent vulnerability. And I didn't, I'm fascinated by the term, and I wanted you to explain a little bit more about that.
I hope I can. I don't think it's a term I've used before. Um, I believe that to live with a full heart, we must give ourselves to things that arise. And it would be foolhardy to say that this isn't a time where we feel vulnerable. And vulnerability feels a little bit more urgent to me right now. To honor that, yes, this is a vulnerable time. Once again, I always like to make statements like that and then follow them up with, it's not meant to get you stuck in a certain place. It's meant to acknowledge so that your heart continues to
But
open.
I think you unlocked it's so funny when I hear something that I haven't heard before. It really piques my interest because that was just a little detail that I didn't have a name for, that I now, from your using that word, understand the urgent vulnerability, the urgent, if coronavirus, I talk with a lot of my clients and a lot of my friends and the people who are in my community. I have the people who are regimented and get things done, and and they've always had a semblance of being in control, the semblance, like they've had the illusion of they've got everything handled and all that stuff, and then this thing comes and sideswipes them, and they're the ones who are a mess, right? Then I
Yeah.
have my alcoholics, my drug addicts, my people who are used to chaos, and we're like, and and not me included, and I'm like, this works with my ADD just perfectly. Now everybody gets to live in my world. I understand that we're all precarious. Like, I understand that we're all vulnerable. I understand that we're all just, a life something away from everything changing, right? So this kind of levels the playing field for everybody to something that I think is actually more true and more real. So when if we weren't having this conversation in the middle of the coronavirus, you and I would be talking about the vulnerability of aging, right? The urgent,
Right.
and how vulnerable, I know how vulnerable I feel in my late 50s. Then you talk about being vulnerable in your 60s, which is a little bit more vulnerable, because again, your body's not doing what it's supposed to be doing, and society isn't giving you the support that you need. So now, uh, what everybody knows is we're freaking vulnerable. I was just talking to
Yeah.
one of my clients who took a job specifically because it was recession proof. It was the safe job and all this stuff. And now it looks like that goes away. Right. So everybody now knows they're vulnerable. And I think there is a grief and a fear to that.
Right. And I think what you're saying about the level playing field, this is something we've never had the playing field leveled like this. It's like this virus doesn't care. And it's not just the virus itself per se. I'm less concerned about getting sick than I am concerned about the fear that's been injected into the culture and what we do with that.
So what fear has been, or what fear do you sense injected into the culture?
Well, I mean, I know you notice it at the grocery store. That's the most obvious place. The day after this thing kind of like blew up, I did my regular grocery shopping without thinking that anything would be different. And I found empty shelves. I mean, I felt like I was shopping in a third world country.
Mm.
Empty shelves, and it's like, and the run on paper products. What is that about? So, and I just totally lost track of what that
That's okay,
theme
because
was.
I'm a
Oh
paper
my God.
towel. I'm a paper towel freak. I'm not a
Okay.
toilet paper freak. I love having a roll of good old Select-A-Size Bounty paper towels. So
Yeah.
like that's my safety thing. But I was in Costco, and it wasn't even about the frenzy of buying stuff. I was in Costco, and there was a surrealness, and being an empath, just feeling the energy, that palpable energy of vulnerability and fear.
That's what we were talking about, fear. Yeah. Um, so there's that in the culture. When people get too afraid without being able to self-soothe, that we can make choices that aren't so good.
Explain more about self-soothing, because I don't want to take it for granted that uh,
Well,
people will understand what that
self-soothing
means.
is like, we talk a lot in this culture about you have to learn to love yourself. And it's a really, really big kind of platitude. You need to learn to love yourself. But you have to kind of drill down on that as to what does that mean on a day-to-day basis. Self-soothing is a way of, can you lie in bed in the morning and breathe deeply and say thank you and rock? Because rocking is very self-soothing. Um, Sometimes when I'm up in the gym in the morning, I stretch, and then I do this little rocking exercise on my spine. And there's something just like, kind of cradle like that's wonderful
Mm.
about that.
So what you're talking about
So
is tools to be able to get yourself,
absolutely.
physically back into homeostasis and emotionally back into allostasis, which is
Yes.
just kind of centered.
To take the fear out of the physical.
Mm.
And so much of the fear right now, I think, is an unknown. It's like if you're running from a bear, that's very specific, and I think that's appropriate fear. But if you're dealing with a list of what ifs in your life, and you keep circling back around over and over again with those what ifs, you can drive yourself kind of nuts. So once again, coming back to that point of learning to be quiet with yourself is a way that we self-soothe and make sense of what's going on in our lives. Journaling is a way of making sense of what's going on in your life that can be self-soothing. Cooking is a way of self-soothing.
Yeah, I mean, people ask, if what's the one last thing that you need in your life, to have. And I used to say it was like an iPod or my music or something like that. And now it's, I just need a pen and good paper. If I have a
Yeah.
good pen and good paper, I feel like I could live anywhere and be okay. I just need to be able to journal and write and all that stuff. So I'm with you there. You said there's a quote that I love. It's preparing for death has everything to do with how you live life.
Yeah. um, if we live life violently, our death seems violent too, our exit seems violent. If we live our life with a kind of contentedness about who we've become and the wide breadth of experience that we've had, then I think death approaches us in a contented way. And so how we live is preparation for how we die.
So I'm thinking now, is there a horse and a cart, a chicken and an egg in this thing? Is it what we think of death? That's how we live our life, or is it how we live our life? That's how we think of death, and which informs which, and where can I pull the lever to help myself?
Boy, that's a really good question. I would say that you have to think of living life first.
How do I want to live my life,
How do I want
and
to
then
live
how I
my
view
life?
death will change.
Right. And then and the idea that you live life to the very best of your ability right up to the very, very end. Um, a guy named George M. Vaillant was head of the Harvard study on adult development. It's one of the largest studies ever done. It's been going on for 40 years, so he's really only one of many directors. And
He did a TED Talk, didn't he?
he probably did.
I think I know the study. Go on. I just
Yeah,
want to,
but
because he
anyway,
sounded familiar.
he talks about really living until you die. That development happens all the way up to the very, very end. And I think about something that my mother said. I asked her when she was in her late 80s if she had any regrets. And she said, my only regret was that I didn't leave my dancing shoes on a little bit longer.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's so precious.
isn't that precious? And so I think that she would have liked to have gone out more dancing. There was an old couple here at Steiner Ranch. I live in a place called Steiner Ranch. I get a little Garrison Keeler with it. I say Steiner Ranch, where all the women are belles and all the men got your back. And Steiner Ranch has a steakhouse, and I like to go to the steakhouse, and they have live music in the summer. And I was there one evening with my husband and this couple. They were probably in their 90s. The guy had on a World War II cap, and they were dancing. And I was amazed that they sat out like maybe one or two dances. And, they didn't quite move the way that they used to, but they were dancing. And everybody in the place watched them and fell in love with them and wanted to be them. And I thought, what a great example, like right before my eyes, these people that are they're just going to
So did you
live.
get up and dance?
Yeah, I did.
Right.
Hubby and I.
So like if you're looking at them and you're going, oh, I wish I could be them. Oh, I can be
I
right
can
now.
be them right now.
That's such a
So
beautiful.
I think life comes first. And then death is not so disappointing.
So tell me about the book. Tell me, why'd you write the book?
The book is a compilation of articles and blog posts and essays that I've done over the last 4 or 5 years about aging. I fell into writing about aging quite by accident, and I didn't realize that it would enliven and awaken in me the fact that I was experiencing this incredibly remarkable and noble passage. That it was really an amazing thing, that these are the golden years.
What makes it noble?
There is a nobility to have lived this long and made this many mistakes and still feel good in my heart. That is a nobility.
And still feel good in your heart. And what do you attribute? Because I often quote Pema Chodron, and
Oh,
she talks about when things happen to you, you have a choice of hardening or opening and softening.
right.
And I remember the couple of tragedies that happened in my life, I made a conscious effort to break my heart open. So I can say that here at 57, almost 58 years old, that my heart is broken wide open, right?
Yeah.
And that was a conscious effort and choice of mine. So I'm hoping that as I age, that I can say that this is a noble passage for myself. How for you? How have you made that choice so that you could end up in with this perspective?
I have found new ways it really comes down to adaptability. I have found ways to adapt. I've adapted to physical limitations by just changing it up. I no longer run, but I walk 3 miles every day, just about. I can no longer do the kind of yoga that I used to be able to do, although I can do part chair yoga and part mat work. So
Mm-hmm.
I do that. I become increasingly grateful for those things because I do know older people that their life is about walkers
Mm.
and their bodies have stiffened. One of the things I do every morning is I spend about 20 minutes just loosening my spine because things concretize. Twyla Tharp wrote a great book recently called Keep It Moving. And the premise of the book is that if your body atrophies, concretizes, seizes up, the heart and mind are soon to follow.
Oh, oh my
So
goodness.
she has this whole thing about dance. And in dance, there are only two movements. There's the contracting movement and there's the expansive movement. So when you're aging, you want to be dancing in the metaphorical sense with the expansive movement. I've read a lot of other people that have inspired me to age well. to love these years. I too am a big Pema Chodra fan, and I'm going to tell you my first, my favorite Pema Chodron quote is, "When a thing happens, you don't always know if it's a good thing or a bad thing."
Mm.
And so here we are in the time of coronavirus, and it's like, well, we don't really know. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Ever the optimist, I would say this is a great wake up call. It's leveled the playing field, and we have an opportunity to reinvent ourselves and to know ourselves more deeply. The examined life is the satisfying life.
It's for me. I can't get away from the tragedy of that's going on, the death, the suffering, the people dying away from their family. The lines at food banks that I saw today is just heartbreaking. And then for my own personal life, and then my clients and the people that I can touch, is great. Uh, I want to acknowledge the suffering. I want my heart to be open, to be able to feel, to be able to experience, to be able to see it. Now, for my own personal responsibility for myself and my own life, the question is, how can I make this the best thing that ever happened to me? How can I make this the reinvention? How can I make this the catalyst that I needed to go to whatever next level? And then I just change my mindset and my viewpoint on that. Now I have days where that's, just not going to happen. But most days, if I stay in that direction, I'm making this the best thing that ever happened to me. Right? I'll finish my book, right? And I'll just, we'll just keep moving forward, right?
Right. These are the questions that you just put forth. And they're the big questions at any age. They're the big questions at any decade. When you are confronted with human suffering, the choices are to remain impotent, and there's just not that much I can do, or to find ways to reach out in the smallest ways. I have people that I text every day. I just check in with them. How are you doing? How are you holding up?
Mm.
How are your kids? Are you safe? Are you well? Do you need anything? I'm still venturing out to the grocery store once a week. So there's a couple people in my neighborhood that I text or I call. Do you need anything? These aren't big things, but it's what I have to give. I got to have a conversation with a 17-year-old the other day who's not going to get to walk across the stage to get her diploma. That's been canceled. She's not going to get to go to prom. Now, in the grand scheme of things, you go, well, that's little, but it's suffering for her.
It's so huge. It's people who belittle that for the teenagers
Oh
are just
no,
miss it, because they don't have the
totally
perspective that this is only a piece of their life. They only have the perspective that this is
right.
their life right now, and my heart breaks for them, not
Yeah.
because it's such a tragic thing, but because they see it only from their own vantage point, right?
Well, and suffering is suffering, whether it's small suffering or it's big suffering. It comes down to a point where when you have some perspective, you go, it's not just your suffering or my suffering, it's the suffering.
Mm.
And so within that container are these kids and this 17-year-old girl that had great disappointment and great courage. She knows it's not the worst thing that's ever happened in her life. That doesn't make it any less of a disappointment.
Mm.
Yeah.
So the book is A Delightful Little Book on Aging, which is just beautiful. And your podcast is the Coffee Table Wisdom Podcast, right? Where
Yep.
where where else can people find you?
Well, they can find me at stephanieraffelock.com. Um, you can find me on Facebook. There's not too many Raffelocks on Facebook.
Sure. So we'll put the links into that so people
Great. That
can.
would be great.
Usually in the podcast, I'm like, so if you're driving, but most people aren't driving anymore.
Right.
All that much to listen to podcasts. But what's exciting for you that's next? What are you creating now?
I'm starting to do some public speaking, and I don't know what's happening to the speaking engagement because of what's going on.
Mm.
We may end up doing something online, but I'm going to speak with a group in conjunction with a group called Breaking the Glass Ceiling, and we're going to talk to the women of Charles Schwab.
The women of Charles Schwab.
Yes.
That's so good. What a delight and what a gift you're going to be for them.
Thank you
Uh,
so
so
much.
So I like I said, I'm going to put the links on so people that want to get more of you. I saw that you have plenty of episodes of your podcast. So if people want more of you, they can get you. And you have some
Yep.
really incredible guests too. So thank you for spending time with us.
Thank you for having me.
This was a sheer pleasure. We can both thank Kate for getting us together. And to the rest of my audience, just thank you for being brave, for being courageous, for putting one foot in front of the other. I love you and have a great rest of the day.